Hello and welcome to SpyHards Podcast. I'm Agent Scott.
And I'm Cam the Provocateur.
And Cam, this is officially part 2 of everyone's festive treat.
That's right, we have more Bond for you, baby.
Deck the halls and ring the bells. It does not end. Obviously, Christmas Day is in a couple of days' time, but we're giving you a second present to open early, and that is, of course, maybe the pinnacle of our interviews. We are speaking to the legendary, the man himself, director extraordinaire, and editor on this week's film, John Glen.
Yes, John Glen, who got his start with the Bond franchise, editing and also doing second unit on Her Majesties, and would go on to direct quite a handful of Bond films, starting with For Your Eyes Only and ending with License to Kill.
Yeah, absolute pleasure to speak with the man, and he was nothing but generous with his time. It kind of blew our minds a little bit to be sitting on a Zoom call with John Glen. I'm not sure I've still quite got over that. How about you?
No, it was surreal because I'd watched a lot of behind-the-scenes documentaries on the Bond films over the years and seen so many clips of him talking about stories of shooting the various movies. And when he logged on to the Zoom call, it was kind of a, wow, like, how did this happen kind of moment.
I was expecting just someone else called John just to turn up and be like, that was it. It was the wrong guy. That makes sense.
He's like, yeah, I'm John Glen.
It's the other guy.
Yeah, the other guy.
But let's get down to it. It's the reason you're all here. Our second present to you all. Cam, roll the interview. And joining us now, it is none other than John Glen. And may I say, it's an absolute thrill to have you on the podcast, sir.
Pleasure.
Now, we usually have guests come on and talk about their whole filmographies, but this week we're working on Her Majesty's Secret Service, which is it's just had its anniversary recently. One of my favorite Bond films, and is actually where you got your start in Bond. So this is what we're focusing on today. We will trail off into other Bond films and questions down the road in this chat, but that's what we're focusing on today. So the first question I have for you, John, is how did you get involved with Bond and on Her Majesty's?
Well, Peter Hunt was directing his first James Bond film, and I'd first met Peter Hunt when we were both junior assistant editors at Shepperton Studios working for Sir Alexander Corder. And Peter advanced through the ranks, the editing ranks, and eventually became a very successful editor on the James Bond films. And I rather lost contact with him for a few years, but unknown to me, he'd been watching my progress, same way that I've been watching his progress, and mine mainly was on TV, films for television like Danger Man.
Mm-hmm.
And he got into a bit of a jam in Switzerland on his big break to direct on Her Majesty's Secret Service. And the conditions were very bad there, the snow conditions and what have you, and he was falling way behind schedule. So he realized he had to have a special unit to direct to make the Bob run sequence. So he suddenly thought of me, and I was a bit down on my luck at the time, and I was working at Twickenham Studios on the Italian job, and I received a phone call in the dubbing theatre there, and it was Peter speaking from Pinewood, and he said, I might have an interesting job for you. Can you get over to see me? Well, Peter Collinson, who was earwigging this, he was the director of the Italian job. He said, I know Harry Saltzman. I'll get on the phone and give you a big recommendation. I said, Peter, please don't spoil anything. But anyway, he gave me permission to leave the dubbing theatre, and I went off to Pinewood, drove over there, and Peter was filming a scene with Diana Rigg and George Lazenby. And I just gave him a little wave, and when he finished the shot, he came over and he opened up the script and showed me the Bob Run sequence. And he said, read that and tell me what you think. So I read the sequence, and then he came back and I said, well, it's a fantastic opportunity, And he said, well, I've got to talk to Harry Saltzman and Cubby Broccoli, he said, but I don't anticipate too much problem. And on the following Monday, there I was, flying first class to Switzerland to take over the second unit on the Bob Run sequence. So it was a wonderful opportunity for me, and came quite unexpected, as most of these things do. And suddenly there I was, from being quite despondent about my career at one moment, and next minute there I was with a really fantastic opportunity to show what I could do.
I would love to know, when you're walking into a situation like this, Bond is a pretty well-oiled machine. They've made a few movies before this. It's a massive production. Does it feel very welcoming, and you have a good sense of where to actually fit in here? Or was it kind of like walking into chaos and trying to make sense of it?
Well, you discover very quickly, the Bond films were the biggest, most important films being made at that time. And they'd had the best technicians. I mean, the whole crew were the top cream of the pile, if you like. So, you had a lot of help. You weren't on your own. It wasn't as though you were working on TV or, working on a minor film. You had whatever you wanted, you got. So you didn't have any excuses about that. The logistics were fantastic. And so I had every opportunity, and I had a great crew. And what was interesting was I wasn't working with British technicians. I was working usually with European guys who were all mountain people. They were all expert skiers. The Clapper boy was a wonderful skier. The whole camera crew were either German, Swiss, or Italian. And because where we were filming, the borders these countries border onto one another, and they're all up in the mountains, and absolute wonderful experience working with these people.
Now, so obviously you had a quick turnaround from agreeing to do this to heading off to Switzerland to actually shoot the second unit stuff with the bobsleigh sequence. What did you do to prepare in those couple of days you had? Did you go back and rewatch some Bond films? What did you do?
No, I was very familiar with the Bond films. Obviously, I mean, I was a fan, if you like, and right from Dr. No onwards. And I was really pleased that Peter Hunt had made such an impression as a film editor, and he did a lot of second unit work as well. So I was very pleased for him, and I admired the films very much. And I admired the way that Peter formed a new kind of editing, a sort of a shortcut version of editing. Sean Connery would just look towards the door, and next minute he was walking down the corridor. It was quite unusual in those days. It was quite an advanced form of editing, and I embraced it very much in what I was doing. And of course, knowing Peter from all those years ago, we had a good relationship and we got on very well. And as soon as I arrived, he actually took the time out to take me down the Bob Run and show me all the various aspects of it. And while we were doing that, some kid came barreling down the Bob Run in a tiny little sledge and burst into the middle of us. Fortunately, he was okay, but it taught me a lesson. I thought, I've got to be very careful. There's a huge safety aspect with these bobs because they travel at 70 miles an hour and they don't stop. You haven't got any, well, they have a brake, but it's not very effective. So you've got to, first thing I learned was I had to be very well of the security on the track because it was open to the public. And, you'll get kids trying to go down the Bob Run. And if our Bob comes tearing along at 60 or 70 miles an hour and they're in the run, there's nothing we can do to stop hitting them. So I immediately instituted a tight security on the run.
Now, I would love to know, the Bond movies were known for their action sequences, and there's some phenomenal ones that happened before On Her Majesties, but this film in particular, it really feels next level, like you're seeing an evolution in Bond action, and something I don't think they maintained when you went to the next movie. Was there something going on, like a vibe or just direction even from Peter Hunt, when you're even doing that bobsled sequence, that we're aiming for something maybe a little different than we usually do?
Absolutely. I mean, I wasn't a skier at that time. Later on, I became a reasonable skier. But at that time, they used to carry me on a sledge or on their backs down the mountainside. I was the only non-skier on the unit. No, it was interesting because I had the use of a guy called Willie Bogner, who was an Olympic skier, but he was also an amateur cinematographer. And he had a specially adapted camera. It was with a Hasselblad viewfinder, so it was a big viewfinder. And he could ski backwards and forwards. He had points at both ends of his skis. And he hadn't been used on the film. And he came to me and he implored me to use him on the bob run. And I said, I was not suspicious of him, but, he wasn't a conventional cameraman at all. And the English crew, camera crew on there, were all sort of warning me about this chap. They were saying, he's an amateur and don't take too much notice of what he says. But I started to use him, and he was fantastic. And he was very brave. And he after we had, we were actually running three bobsleds on the run at the same time. One was the camera bob, and then there was the adversary bobsleigh, and then there was Bond's bobsleigh. So we had three, and it was very difficult to keep the distances you require when you film. So Willie said to me, he said, look, if you tie me to the bob with a cable, say 20 or 30 feet behind the bob, I'll keep absolutely perfect focus. And if I get into trouble, I'll knock this cable out of my battery belt, and I can escape by jumping out of the run. Anyway, I looked at him and I couldn't believe what he was saying, but in fact, it proved to be the best way to film the sequence. And we got absolute perfect focus every time. We did have a couple of little spills, and we lost a camera. Willie dropped the camera at one point, and we had to get another one sent out from England, which delayed us a little bit, but we didn't stop shooting. We were still operating with the normal cameras, if you like. So generally, I mean, Willie was a big bonus on the film, and I used him absolutely a lot. He even stood inside the bob run and filmed the bob going past him at 60 miles an hour. And he said to me, he said, the centrifugal foot force being what it is, they'll always go up on the wall as they go around the corner. So I can stand on the inside of the curve and get perfect shots every time. So it was very unusual filming, but it certainly worked.
I think Health and Safety would have had a blast with that if you'd done that now.
Yeah.
They wouldn't have been
Health
fans.
and Safety.
Yes. So this is the first film with George Lazenby, and you're working with a very young, very physical actor, which must have been interesting, especially as you're launching a new Bond for the first time post Connery. Did his sort of physicality as an actor feed into the way that some of the action was being shot to try to match it, and also just to maybe enhance what we hadn't really seen before?
Well, of course, George Lazenby, he was a very macho guy, and he loved to. He wanted to get on skis. Now, he hadn't done much skiing. He hadn't done any skiing, as far as I know. And of course, I'm on my first assignment, on a major film as second unit director, and the insurance costs on one of those movies is huge. If I broke George's leg or his arm or something, my career would have ended there and then straight away. So my main job was to keep George off of skis. And of course, I'm working with all these world champion skiers that are all, trying to get friendly with George and encouraging him to get on skis. And I'm trying to discourage him from getting on skis. So that was one of my main jobs, was to keep George safe, because I knew very well that if he got injured, it would have terrible repercussions on the film.
Right. And the sequence, the bobsled sequence, is, definitely a standout within the film. But one thing I really admire about it is it never really loses track of character. You always have a good sense of the personalities of Bond and Blofeld throughout the sequence. And that's something that some action scenes in films struggle to when you have stunt doubles. How do you maintain character in a sequence like that?
Well, of course, we do the close shots of the actors in the studio mostly. Once or twice, I was able to use them on the real location. Telly Savalas, for instance, I had the use of him to do when he first arrives in the Bob Run, and he slips down. And when I told him what I wanted him to do to actually jump into the run, he looked at me and he said, "Where's my stunt man?" So it was like, "Oh, okay, George." Telly Savalas, he was, and George, they were great, but Telly wasn't going to risk breaking his ankle, or he wasn't going to do anything too energetic. I mean, he wasn't a particularly young man at that time. So he did what I had to do, but he did it very safely, shall we say? He was no hero.
So what is there any moments through the bobsled run that jump out to you as, the most satisfying or the most difficult shot to pull off, the one that you kind of, everyone was kind of cheering when you actually achieved it?
Well, the thing was that I had a very good production manager with me, a German chap, and he was very, very good, a very good organizer. And we arranged to have 2 helicopters standing by, and as soon as we'd done one shot of the bobs in action, they would pick up the bobs and fly them back to the start of the run again. So this meant that we could actually do, up to about 12 runs a day, which is unheard of, when you think 3 bobs on the run sometimes, and mainly 2 bobs on the run. And we were able to pick them up after each and do 12 takes a day. So that was incredibly good for the schedule. We could get through the stuff. And then I used Johnny Jordan, who was from his helicopter, who had a special rig, which was photographing it from the air as well. And we all had to wear white suits so we couldn't be seen from the helicopter against the snow. But it was a very successful operation. And this time the weather had improved. When I first started shooting, the weather was terrible, snow, blizzards, what have you. And I put a sheet over the bob run, and I did close shots of the steering mechanism, close shot of the blades cutting the ice just by sweeping snow through the shot to give the feeling of movement and jiggling the camera around. And when my first material was shown to Saltzman and Broccoli at Pinewood Studios, someone in the audience said, "Well, what a waste of time, we could have done that in the studio." And Saltzman turned around and he said, "Look," he said, "we've been sitting here for 3 months and not seen any material. At least this guy is shooting something." And the great benefit of doing that is to keep the crew occupied. Because once they start playing football and what have you, you lose them. They lose the will to live, if you like. And certainly, they were useful shots, and we couldn't get enough of them. I mean, Peter Hunt kept saying to me, "Have you got any more shots of these close shots?" Because if you look at that sequence, you'll see they use quite a bit. Bullets hitting the cowling and things like that. Things you can do in those conditions. Because there's no shortage of light. I mean, there's a huge amount of light up there even in a blizzard, the light is tremendous. You're still shooting F-11,
For sure. Now, you would go on and do second unit on Spy Who Loved Me and Moonraker. I would love to know, were there any lessons you picked up doing On Her Majesties that were very helpful going forward in the Bond franchise?
Lots and lots of lessons. I mean, I was young enough to learn lessons quite easily. And I was always very safety conscious. And on Spy Who Loved Me, for instance, I went out to Canada and I shot the ski parachute jump. with Rick Sylvester, who was like a ski bum, an amateur guy. He showed me a film he'd shot in Yosemite Park, where he skied off of El Capitan, and it was like a sack of coal going off. There was nothing James Bond about it at all. It was just a very bad jump, and I could understand that. But he assured me that given the right conditions and the right crew, etc., that he could perform it gracefully, as one would expect. And we sat out there for about 3 weeks waiting for the weather conditions. And eventually, when I got a break, a 2-hour break, where the sun was skating around the horizon, you can imagine at that latitude. And when I actually filmed the shot, I waited for the doctor. With the last helicopter brought the doctor in. And when I said to Rick, don't forget, Rick, do it, and you don't forget your James Bond, and do it with style and panache. And he did. He performed beautifully. And because it was so late in the day, and the sun was skating round, if you look at that shot, the sun is actually spotlighting Bond as he goes down that slope. And if I had been a gambler, that's when I would have chosen to shoot it at that particular moment. Next, as soon as he'd gone out of shot, the sun was disappeared. You know, it was quite an amazing piece of good fortune, as well as good planning. And having shot that sequence, of course, it went back. I got it processed in Montreal, and it wasn't the perfect shot, because at one point, one of the cameramen hit the zoom lens because he thought we weren't going close enough, and there was a bit of a jiggle. But as I was shooting at 3 times normal speed, 72 frames a second, the jiggle wasn't as violent as it would have been if I'd been shooting at 24 frames a second. So in fact, it makes it look more realistic, which it was real. I mean, today you'd never do a shot like that. It would all be done in, in the computer. Mm-hmm. But that's real, and it looks real. And the slight defect in it makes it even more real, if you follow me. And I came back to Pinewood, and everyone was going crazy about this shot, because it was the first shot that we'd done on the film on Spy Who Loved Me. And this was Cubby's first film on his own. Cubby Broccoli, he split with Harry Saltzman, and now he was on his own. And he was thrilled to bits with it. And in fact, they were so thrilled that he and the director, Lewis Gilbert, they insisted that I went out and shot the chase that preceded it. And there again, I used my old friend Willie Bogner with his handheld camera, and I also used a very good Swiss cameraman I'd used on the Majestys, Alex Barbie, and they were a great team. They didn't like each other particularly. In fact, I had to separate them from fighting each other one day. We were experiencing bad weather, and we were in the top of the cable car station and drinking coffee and brandy and what have you. And I said, we've got to shoot something. I said, come on, we go up on the roof of the cable car station and we'll do an insert. And I went up there, and if you ever look at that sequence, you see the shot where the rocket that Bond fires from his gun, where it hits the heavy who's chasing him. That close shot of the rocket going into his chest, we actually shot on top of the restaurant and the cable car station when it was snowing. But at that point, Alex and Willie had decided to have a fight, and I had to separate them. You know, I don't know. It's a strange thing, isn't it? That's cruise for you.
Well, I mean, we spoke a lot about the bobsleigh team, bobsleigh sequence, I should say, in On Her Majesty's Secret Service. And I think one of the reasons that stands out is not only from what you shot, but the way it's edited together, which is, funnily enough, another one of your jobs on the film, which is you were, of course, the film's editor as well. When was that agreed? Because obviously they brought you on to be the second unit director. Did they then say, we'd like you to edit it afterwards, or was that during the filming?
Well, yeah. Well, Peter Hunt, he said to me, I'd like you to go and edit the stuff you've been shooting for me, you know, put it together yourself. So he already had an editor assigned to the picture. And after he'd seen my stuff, he had a disagreement with the editor, whether it had something to do with the fact that I was there editing my stuff or not. And he got a bit upset, I don't know, but he decided to leave. So then Peter turned around to me and he said, I'd like you to continue and edit the film. And, you know, Peter was a great editor. So, you know, it was a pleasure for me to work with him.
And I mean, Peter Hunt defines the James Bond action style, starting right from Dr. No. I'm just really curious, what is the dynamic like in the editing room when you have a director who is such an incredible editor? How much is it, you know, a collaboration between the two? How much is it you giving suggestions? How does that sort of dynamic play out?
Well, we work quite separately. I mean, Peter took some of the dialogue scenes, you know, the scenes with Diana Rigg and what have you, and he would edit those scenes, and he would hold court in his cutting room. He'd always have lots of visitors coming in. So whereas I was in the next room doing the real work, if you like. So we had a good working relationship. There was plenty of work for both of us. I concentrated mainly on my action stuff. And he kept saying to me on the Bob run, he said, the film's running at 2 hours, 40 minutes. We got to sharpen it up. We got to, you know, try and lose some footage. And I really, on the Bob run sequence, I think at the very end, it was almost too tight sometimes. You know, we kept chipping away at it to try and reduce the length of it. But you know, it's one of those strange things with scripts and that, you try and time the script before you start shooting, and you try and time out how long it's going to be, but you never really know. And invariably, it turns out to be a lot longer than you anticipate. And we had some great stuff in that film, and it took a lot of nerve sometimes to reduce scenes drastically. But, you know, we did finish up when we first ran it for Cubby Broccoli. Cubby said, "How long is it?" And Peter lied through his teeth. He said, "It's 2 hours, 20 minutes. I mean, I just sat there, I knew it was 2 hours, 40. But Cubby was no fool. We weren't fooling him, I'm sure. But it did go out at 2 hours, 40. But United Artists, when they ran it in America, they were losing one showing a day, you see, which is a huge amount of money. So they just took 20 minutes out of the picture. Mm-hmm. But subsequently, it was put back once it was sold to television and what have you. That footage went back, but you know, they weren't going to lose out on a showing a day. It would have cost too much money.
The director Steven Soderbergh cites Honor Majesties as his favorite Bond film, but also a movie he goes back to over and over again when he's getting ready to direct his own films. And one thing he's noted is that it has a lot of the style of like French New Wave films in the filmmaking. And one thing he really underlines is that when you look at the action sequences in Honor Majesties, a lot of action films now have, you know, rapid cut action. But what he notes with Honor Majesties is every shot is impeccable. Like every shot looks beautiful. So even though you're cutting quickly, you get a real sense of just the beauty of the moment. And I would love to know if you could just talk about if this is something that maybe emerged from the fact that both you and Peter Hunt are editors, like you understand not just the language of editing, but also, you know, you're both directors on your own right.
Well, I carved out quite a decent career. I was editing, and I was also doing a lot of second unit directing and editing on the same film, even before I became a director. So what happens on an action sequence is that you break it down into small parts so that you know, you don't try and do it in one take, the whole thing. You know, you might have a scene that goes on for 2.5 minutes, but you break it down into 3-second segments. So you concentrate on those small pieces, and you storyboard. So it's like comic cuts, really. And what you do is, because you can't control the weather, if you get a sunny day, you have to do your wide shots. If you get a day where it's snowing or raining, you do your close shots and your inserts. And the great thing is that you not only is it efficient from a scheduling point of view, but you keep the morale of the crew up. You know, as I say, once they start to play football, you're in trouble. You lose them. You know, you just have to keep them working, and you can always find something to shoot. I mean, sometimes we even did scenes without filming the camera, just to keep everyone busy. You know, and that shows in the films in a way, because there's a crew, a busy crew is a happy crew, and you know, you rely very much on all these people. Yeah, we had a very happy experience on Majestys. It was lovely up there, up in the mountains, and the weather was unpredictable. So you had to be, every morning I'd look out the window, you know, first light, and then the phone would ring and they'd say, "Oh, it's terrible. We can't fly today. We can't put the helicopters up today," and all that. And I'd say, "Okay, well, we'll meet at the so-and-so and we'll do some close shots." And we'd just fritter away the day, just playing around with inserts, quite honestly, but everyone was kept busy.
Mm-hmm. And when you were editing the film, you know, as Soderbergh noted, the French New Wave kind of feel, was that something you were cognizant of? Were you looking at the films coming out of France at that point and influenced by them?
Well, I worked with a director called John Glen, you may have heard of.
Yep.
He went on to do some very good films. When I first worked for him, it was at Nettlefold Studios in the 50s, I guess. And he was an avant-garde filmmaker, and he used a lot of handheld camera work. And he wasn't very popular with the production people, with the producers and the owners of Nettlefolds. And he was banned from the studio after he finished filming. So I was on the editing. I wasn't actually editing. I was an assistant editor on this particular film. And we used to let John up the fire escape into the cutting room so he could work with us and be prepared to run if any of the bosses came round, you know. But we kept John happy, and John made his contribution, and he could see what was going on with his film. And for years afterwards, I remember on one of my films, I was going to use Tanya Roberts as the leading lady, and I rang John and asked him his opinion. He'd just done Queen of the Jungle with her, and he filled me in too. You know, he said she's very beautiful, but she has a few problems, shall we say. And he marked my card, but we went with her, and she was fine. But it was nice to be able to talk to him, and of course he went on to be a very successful director.
Right. There's one sequence in On Her Majesty's that I've always found really interesting. And it's the sequence where Bond is trying to escape from Blofeld's men, and he winds up at like the Winter Carnival. He runs into the bear that takes the photo. And this whole sequence feels like a psychological thriller moment. It really does have a different vibe than a lot of the other scenes in the movie. And I think it really stands out for that reason. If you could just talk a little bit about editing that sequence to kind of capture that sense of paranoia.
Yeah, well, the whole scene was supposed to take place around the Christmas period. So there was a kind of a festival feel about the atmosphere in Grindelwald where we were filming. And we flooded the car park there with water, which froze, of course, and that became our car park. It became our ice rink. And I mean, if you went to Grindelwald in the summer and that, there it is, a car park. But just imagine what it was like with us, where we were actually made a big festival there, and we had all these people skating. It's where Diana Rigg meets George Lazenby there, and it's a lovely scene. It's romantic and it's very colourful, and you know, it was mainly first unit shooting. I must say, I just did a few things in it, but basically it was Peter Hunt's scene. Mm-hmm. And it had a lovely atmosphere, and it was genuinely a festival. You know, when you were there, all the local people were there, and not all of them being paid even. You know, they were just there because they're having a lot of fun, and it is very festive. and it was a lovely atmosphere, and the music helped a lot because we played the Christmas Carol song that was specially written for the film, and it just had a lovely feel to it.
Was there a rhythm you were trying to hit when you're actually editing that sequence together?
Yeah, I think a rhythm kind of evolves. It depends on the material you have. I mean, you don't actually cut it to music necessarily, but you certainly add the music at some stage, and that helps you to time the shots sometimes. Mm-hmm. I mean, we used to, when we edited films, all my films, we put in temporary music on the love scenes and some of the action scenes. We put temp music in, and we get the best music. We'll get stuff from Gone with the Wind and put that in, just while we're editing. And I remember John Barry would say, take that music out before I see the film, because it would influence him, so we used to have to strip all the temp music out for John Barry. He did a fantastic score, by the way, on the Majestys.
Yeah, oh, definitely. One of his best.
The zither. He used this electronic music, which hadn't been used before that I know of. Probably it was in a few films, but it had a very resonant bass rhythm to it, and it was very unusual. And of course, then we had Louis Armstrong singing that wonderful song.
Oh,
we have all the time in the world.
Now, when you were in the editing room, I'm just wondering if there was any example you can think of that was like a creative solution you came up with just in the editing room that really worked in the movie, something that you kind of had to figure out.
Well, when Bond gets slugged by one of the villains, Peter asked one of the assistants to get it frame cut. So, in other words, we drop every other frame to make the thing have the impact twice as fast as it really happened. Mm-hmm. But the assistant misunderstood him, and he double printed each frame instead. So now you had that strange effect which came purely by chance. And we saw it, and it worked perfectly. Double framing each one when he gets hit by this chap over the head, So that was something that worked, which we hadn't really thought of, and the mistake was eventually used in the film. There were lots of examples of that. I mean, it's very much a work in progress, on a film. You try this and try that, and it's the same with Rydell Love, my sound editor. He was in charge of doing all the noise of the skiing. The noise the skis make, and particularly on the bob run, the sound of the bob run. And he finished up using a sort of a black plastic sheet and a scrubbing brush or a wire brush to get that sound. And it was all very experimental, but we all had fun doing it,
Now, you've at this point you've edited the film. It's out there. Is there something looking back on A Majesty's Secret Service, a particular scene that you edited that you're particularly proud of? Maybe your favorite moment from the film?
Well, I suppose it's the bob run sequence mainly, but there were other sequences I went on to do. I mean, there was the scene, the chase, heading off at the pass where Blofeld is chasing Bond on his skis. And it was a night scene. So I had a word with the guys and the electricians and what have you, and they couldn't really transport all the big lamps that we'd need. So we decided to use flares. So we put up these big poles with flares on the top, which are out of picture, but just used it to light the scene. And then, of course, the people who were pursuing him also carry flares. And that was quite unplanned initially. And Peter was filming in Portugal at the time I was filming that. And when he saw that stuff, he was very impressed with it. And the scene where they're during the chase, he skis over that big snow clearing machine, which is a huge piece of equipment, very dangerous. So I had all these skiers of mine all leaping over the top of this machine that had these terrific blades churning up the snow. And we found that if we just put red dye and all kinds of animal remains and stuff, anything going. But that was an interesting scene. And then we threw a line over when all this red snow comes up, which is supposed to be blood because the guy falls into it. We put the line over. He had a lot of guts.
Yeah,
and that was fun. Yeah, so we did a lot of improvisation on the Bond films, and very, very happy films to work on.
Well, that leads me into my next question. Actually, you know, you gone on to do second unit on a few more Bond films. You then directed 5 Bond films. But looking back on Her Majesty's Secret Service, it's actually one of my top 5 Bond films, and it's definitely had a reappraisal since it came out. I know it had a bit of a rocky reception with Lazenby and such in that respect. But looking back on it now yourself, what does On Her Majesty's Secret Service mean to you?
Well, it was my big break, really. You know, it plucked me from obscurity into the big time, if you like. And quite honestly, it was a wonderful opportunity, and I think I grabbed it with both hands, you know. You know, I wasn't a skier, and I was working with all these skiers. Everyone, even the girl that used to bring the coffee down, was on skis, you know. And so I was reliant on these chaps, and they were very good. And I sort of communicate very well with the Europeans, if you like, you know, the Germans, the Swiss, the Italians. You know, we had a very mixed crew, and we worked absolutely fantastically well together. And there was no communication problems whatsoever because we all spoke the same language. Films, it's pretty international, and they all know they're all trying to do a good job, you know. Mm-hmm. So no, it's interesting because Cubby Broccoli always remembered. I put him on the bob run. He had a ride down the bob run one morning, and it was a four-man bob. And Cubby, as you probably know, was a very big man, so he occupied the 2 seats in the middle. And there was Robert Zinnemann, who was the Swiss bob champion, and Heinz Loy, who was in the steering. And they went down in one of the fastest runs of the day. And Cubby just he just loved it. He just, you know, when they went round the stone curve, all your blood goes down into your ankles, you know, you're going around there with the centrifugal force. And he never forgot that. And he loved it. And when Lewis Gilbert got the gig to shoot Spy Who Loved Me, the first thing he said to Cubby said to Lewis, he said, "You've got to find a job for John to do on the directing." I was going to edit the film anyway, but he said, "You've got to get him to direct something." And that's how I came to do the ski parachute jump. First shot of the film.
Mm-hmm. So I have sort of a grab bag of questions just about some of the Bond films you directed. It's so much to go through, so I just wanted to pick out some questions that maybe people haven't asked you many times. One, just to kick it off, when it came to For Your Eyes Only, it opens with a shot of Bond at Teresa's grave, and you work on Her Majesties. We also touch on Teresa Bond in License to Kill. This is not an era where the Bond franchise is really trying to embrace continuity like it is now. Was it, you know, something that you were pushing for? Because it's very rare to have these sort of, you know, repeated concepts popping up movie to movie.
Well, I used to design the pre-title sequences, you know, and sometimes they had nothing to do with the movie at all, you know, that was going to follow. And on For Your Eyes Only, my first instructions from Cubby Broccoli was to find another Bond. He thought that Roger was getting too old and it was costing too much and what have you. So I was told to find a new Bond. So that's how we came to do that. I came to work at that graveyard scene out to remind the audience about the history of Bond, of Teresa. And then, of course, the helicopter comes and picks him up, and then it's run by remote control. And how that happened was I was walking around the studio one Sunday with Cubby, and one of the carpenters there brought his boy in on a Sunday, and the kid was running around with what was then a very new toy, which was a remote controlled car. and we both stopped as the car ran into us. And that's what gave me the idea for the remote controlled helicopter. So I developed that sequence with that from that little incident, you know.
And I have a question for my sister. Octopussy is her favorite movie of all time, not James Bond, movie, period. One she's revisited over and over again. And she had a question for you. She says, Octopussy features a lot of women in spandex jumpsuits and sexier outfits, but the characters themselves were very strong and independent. The movie presents these women as empowered and not to be objectified like some of the other Bond films did. How were you able to film and capture the strength of these women instead of having them presented as Bond sex objects?
Well, I suppose it all goes back to when you select these girls. They come into a lot of them were models, had been models sometimes, and they were coming from all sorts of directions. And I think we needed about 20 girls in that film. So they would come in the office and it would be very enjoyable. You know, they'd come and we'd have a chat with them and I'd give them a cup of coffee, and it was all very informal. And what we were looking for was character from these girls. Obviously good looks, but also character and also athletic ability. There was an awful lot of circus stuff in that film, and we needed acrobats. So sometimes we got acrobats in as well. We had a whole mishmash of girls. Even the love boat scene at the end of the film is where, you know, you see all these girls rowing the love boat with Roger Moore, and you know, making love in the back of the boat with a broken leg up in some sort of truss, and the girls outside are rowing, and they're saying in out at the same time that Bond is making love with the leading lady. So it was very funny scene. But you know, all through that film we had a wonderful bunch of girls, probably the best we ever had assembled in one movie, and they were all great personalities. And they kind of, you know, working together, there was a bit of competition from them, you know, which is always a good thing. They were sort of competing against one another in a way, and that got the best out of them.
Do you think also having Maud Adams as the center really helped in that regard? Because like she brings so much sophistication to that character that maybe it raised the game of everyone around her.
Yeah, she was lovely, Maud, no doubt about it, still is. And I remember on the set one day at Octopussy, she brought her mother in, and her mother was in her 70s. And she introduced me to her mother, and I looked at Maud and I said, I can see, Maud, where you get your good looks from. And her mother was looking fantastic at 72 or whatever it was. And Maud is aging very well as well. And no, they're great girls. And Maud, of course, she's the only one that's actually appeared in two Bond movies, starred in 2 Bond movies, which is unusual.
Now, speaking of strong women, I have a question as well about View to a Kill. That was the Bond film I saw first that made me fall in love with the franchise. But now I look at that movie and I see that you're shooting scenes with Grace Jones and Christopher Walken. And the dynamic between the two of them is combustible in the movie. I would just love to know about working with those 2 actors, very unique individuals on set, and finding that sort of chemistry.
Yeah, well, Grace was wonderful. I mean, she was, she's just a big personality. And she and Roger had a bit of a set too one day where she liked to play this very loud music, because she was more known as a musician, you know, as a singer, if you like, than she was as an actress. And she used to play this very loud music, and she was in the next dressing room to Roger Moore. And Roger got so fed up with this music that he went in and he grabbed hold of this ghetto player she was using, and he was trying to smash it, and she was fighting with him. And this went on for about 10 minutes in the corridor. It was very amusing. But they had a good relationship, really. It's just that they were, you know, I think that Grace, I remember when we finished shooting, she said to me, she said, "Oh, John," she said, "what am I going to do now the film's ended? Because we all become a kind of a family, you know. We shoot for 6 months on a movie, and you become really attached to these people. It's just like having a family. And of course, you finish shooting, and it all ends, and they all go off in their different directions. And that's the end of it. And it's quite sad in some ways. And Grace was in tears, you know, and she said goodbye. You know, it was. But I mean, I saw her. I've seen her from time to time since then, of course, and I think she even plays at the Henley Festival here where I live. She played one year, but no, they're wonderful people, wonderful crew on that film, and Christopher Walken, of course, is a fabulous actor. He was very offbeat. When we were filming in Chantilly, he had a habit of wandering off. And so I got the junior assistant director, and I said, "Look, here's a radio. Don't let Christopher Walken out of your sight, because whenever we need him, we need him. You know, we don't have to go looking through the woods to find him." And of course, this Christopher watching this boy, and the moment the poor boy turned his eyes the other way, Christopher was gone. And the poor kid got told off because he'd lost Christopher. But we got him back. But he was a great fun to work with. Very, very nice man.
And I had a question about, we are seeing the last Daniel Craig film. I see it tonight at the time we're recording this. And they're going to be launching a new Bond in a couple of years. You launched a new Bond when you brought Timothy Dalton in for The Living Daylights. What sort of, lessons did you learn about launching not just Timothy Dalton, but you were there for the launch of George Lazenby as well, that you think is something that really is important when it comes to sort of that initial Bond entry, the one that's going to, introduce them to viewers?
Yeah, you have to devise a novel way of introducing him. I think Peter Hunt did with on the Majesty's Secret Service. You had a whole series of inserts of lighters being flicked and cigarettes being lit and whatever, and then slowly revealed him in that fight sequence on the beach. That was, I think there was a line, something about the other fella, Mm-hmm. I think it'll be the same with the new Bond whenever they decide to do it. It might be a gap of 2 or 3 years before they do it. I don't know, but I think the public will be ready for it, and I can imagine a line coming from M, something like "You've got big boots to fill," referring back to Daniel Craig, I suppose, who's been very successful, let's face it. But I mean, all the Bonds have been successful except for poor old George. Only did the one, and he likes to say now he turned down the chance to do a second one. I'm not sure that's true. I was there. But he turned up. But one day we were at a music session, and this figure came in, and I thought it was a tramp who had come off the streets. I was in the music. We were recording the music, and this figure came in. He kept looking at me and grinning, and he had this big full beard. I didn't recognize him. It was George, and he said to me, he said, "John, you don't recognize me, do you?" And I said, "God, George, no, I don't." Well, Cubby wasn't very happy about it, introducing a new Bond, and he comes up looking like as though he'd been sleeping rough. That's not what Bond's all about, is it? So he didn't endear himself to Cubby and turned up at the premiere with this beard as well. It wasn't quite the image that Cubby had in mind, but that's George. He's that sort of character.
But, speaking of legacy, we briefly mentioned No Time to Die, which of the three of us, only I have seen right now. So no spoilers are in this chat. But, I will say it makes several nods towards On Her Majesty's Secret Service. And I think that goes to stand for the fact that it's such an influential film. It might have been necessarily successful in some ways at its time with George, but I think it's gone on to influence the franchise ever since. And I think that's a lot to do with your editing and your directing in the film. So I think that's what's brought us to this conversation. We can only thank you for doing that and bringing us years of enjoyment.
It's very kind of you to say that. I think it's also fair to say it was probably one of the best books on the Majestys. You know, it had everything in it. A lot of heart, shall we say? You know, the fact that Bond gets married briefly. I mean, his bride is killed within hours of the marriage. You know, it was a tragic sort of thing. You know, really. And but it was a very, very good book. And the setting, I don't think we could afford to shoot that now. You know, in Switzerland, I think it was, you know, I think 10 Swiss francs to the pound at that time. Now it's about one, if we're lucky. So, you know, the cost of filming in those beautiful mountains in Switzerland is astronomical now. So I think we did it at the right time.
As someone who worked on Honor Majesties, did you find it at all frustrating when the follow-up film Diamonds Are Forever came around and really didn't do anything to continue the storytelling of Honor Majesties?
Not really. I don't think there's I mean, I think, you know, you had the Fleming books at that time. I mean, now, of course, we don't have the books. We have the characters, but we don't have the books. And it's a sad loss because in today's world, it's a struggle to find to find a great villain. In our day, the stories were a lot simpler. You know, they weren't dealing with computers and stuff. I mean, all my films were done for real. All the stunts were done for real, and we had to be ingenious. Now it's oh, don't do that. We'll do that in post. You know, and I think the films are missing something by it, you know, because when you do real stunts, somehow that you know they're real. I mean, explosions, for instance, you know, they don't look real half the time now. And I think the public are pretty sophisticated. I think they see the difference.
Now that, you know, this is Daniel Craig's last film, and we're going to pivot off one way or another, where would you like to see them go? There's been talks of them going back and starting the books again and then going back to maybe the 50s and 60s. And then there's talks of, you know, recasting different genders and things like that. Where would you like to see the Bond franchise go post Daniel Craig?
I think I'd like to see them go a bit simpler, you know, go back to real things. Less of the sophisticated gadgetry you're getting now, you know, the reliance on computers. It's maybe my age, you know, the fact that I'm not particularly computer literate. I mean, my wife is, fortunately, although she might disagree with me. But you know, it's funny how the films change, because I remember when with Roger Moore, I remember talking to Michael Wilson about it, and you know, I said to Michael at the time, I said, Michael's got such a wonderful personality. He's like you know, he's wonderful. Kids love him, and everyone loves him. You know, and it's very difficult to make him out to be a killer. Sean Connery, you could believe he could kill someone, you know what I mean? But I don't think anyone could ever believe Roger Moore could kill anyone. In fact, my wife said the other day that, yeah, he'd tickle them to death. But so we had to tailor those films to take into account the actor's personality. And I mean, some people might argue that Daniel Craig's a bit glum. You know, there's not that much humor. In my films, it was all humor, because that's what we were working. We were working with Roger mainly, and it was a laugh a minute. You know, he's just such a funny man, and he's a good actor, a very good actor. But he never thought of himself as being a good actor. Roger, I keep reassuring him. I just have to say, "You can do it, Roger. You can do it."
Well, I'm very conscious of your time. So we have a quick fire round of questions we always do at the end of our interview. So I'll throw that to you now before we wrap up, John. Beyond Bond, what is, you know, because we're a spy movie podcast, we tackle not just Bond, but spy movies in general. What is your favorite spy movie? Well, I suppose I love the Indiana Jones films. I thought that Spielberg was muted at one time. He said that he would love to have done a James Bond film.
I don't think we could have afforded him, quite honestly, but he said that. So what did he do? He went and did his Indiana Jones films, which are really like James Bond films in his own way, again, using a lot of humor. So I used to like those films very much. The other spy films, I was trying to think of the one with Schwarzenegger, where he was a spy, but his wife didn't know it.
True Lies.
Yeah. True Lies. I like that very much. Yeah. Cameron's a very good director, and I think that there's been lots of good spy films, even some of the Hitchcock films from years ago, Foreign Correspondent and all this stuff. What I loved about Hitchcock was his humor. He always managed to put humor into a film. I think it was in Foreign Correspondent where he had a rather mundane car chase, like 3 cars chasing each other through a village. And how he took the curse off of it was he had a drunk come out of a pub and go to step in the road, and the first car comes through and the guy steps back. Then he goes out to step on the road again, and then the second car comes back. And by the time the third car comes through, the guy turns around and goes back in the pub, which I just thought was absolutely a fantastic stroke of comedy, something he obviously improvised to a large extent because it was such a corny situation, And I think you can take a situation on a film where you think, oh, this is awful, what can I do to lighten it up? We had a lot of fun on the Bonds with humor, I must say. I mean, I think on Octopussy, it's one of my favorite films as well, but I really did take a chance on that. At times it's a bit like the Keystone Cops, the railway, the train, where the Mercedes gets its tires shot off and it finishes up on the railway track, I'm sure Cubby's eyebrows went up a bit when he saw that happen. But it worked,
You may have
it worked with Roger Moore. It wouldn't work with Daniel Craig, It just reinforces what I'm saying, that it works with Roger, but it wouldn't work with Daniel Craig. It's just, it's one of those things, isn't it? You have to tailor the action and the film to suit the actor that's playing the part. I don't think you have to be the greatest actor in the world to play James Bond, quite honestly, but you have to have a sense of fun and a twinkle, Mel Gibson would have made a fantastic Bond, I always thought.
Mm-hmm. It's nice to know I'm still in with a chance. Maybe if I still had hair, perhaps. I don't know. I don't think the world's ready for a bald Bond.
Well, Sean did all right without too much hair, didn't he?
Oh, true.
Yeah. Well, I suppose that leads me on to my last question then. In terms of Bond films, what is your favorite Bond film? Could be one you've directed or edited or any of them, really.
I think Goldfinger was my favorite Bond film. Modesty precludes me from mentioning my films, really, but I think Goldfinger was the one that the book I loved. And Guy Hamilton, who was a friend, I knew him very well. Guy was a very good director, and he also was a very nice person. He was a bit of a war hero as well. He had quite a war service. He spoke absolute fluent French, as he was brought up in Paris. And Janine and I had a wonderful dinner with him in France, running a film, and we had dinner afterwards, and he told us some of his exploits in the Second World War. An amazing man. And he used some of the things that they used to do. He was on special ops, where they used to run agents into France, and he got stranded there. He got the boat had to leave suddenly, and poor old Guy was left in France for about a month, living down a cellar. And after a while, they felt sorry for him, the farmer that was hiding him, and he took him down to the local pub, and it was full of German soldiers. And the stupid waitress there shouted out, You're not from round here. He had a different accent. So he was quite a character. But sadly, he's gone. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, all I can say is thank you for taking the time to speak to us today. It's not often you get to speak to your heroes, so I can only say thank you for your time, John.
Mm-hmm.
It's a pleasure. It's nice talking to you. Some nice questions.
So yeah, John, thank you so much for joining us. As I said, you've brought light to a film, and this is our Christmas movie as well. So we're glad you could join us for a special nice. Christmas treat.
Yeah, and I mean, I just want to say, like, the three movies that made me love James Bond were Octopussy, For Your Eyes Only, and The Spy Who Loved Me. So you had a real stamp just on my entire life, really. And I still love Bond, and it's those three that were the ones I watched over and over and over again as a young person all the way to now.
I think it depends really on your age when you're introduced to Bond for the first time. They have such an impact on you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I remember on one occasion, a friend of mine went to see, I think it was Octopussy, and where the squid thing comes out of during the fight, clamps itself on a guy's face. He said his son, who was with him, hid under the chair because it was so frightening. And he saw me and he said, "I was cursing you," he said, "because my boy then insisted on me taking him back a second time to the cinema so that he could keep his eyes open when the octopus clamped onto the baddie's face." And he said he had to see it 3 times in all. I said, "Well, it was good for business."
Well, John, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us today.
Pleasure.
Well, there you go, folks. That was our chat with John Glen. As I said in the intro, I'm still genuinely surprised it even happened.
Yeah, no kidding. It's a Christmas miracle indeed. And I was riveted to hear him talk about, so many of the interviews with John Glen, they're talking about, directing Octopussy, for example, or, kicking off the Dalton era with The Living Daylights. But it's very rare that we spend a lot of time, with him actually talking about shooting the bobsled sequence on Her Majesties and editing that film. So often when people talk about John Glen and the Bond franchise, it's more of a postscript of, oh yeah, he started out as an editor, but then he became a director, and let's talk about those movies. I thought it was so much fun to do kind of a deep dive on his beginnings.
Absolutely. And, we didn't talk about this in the intro, but really what we were trying to do with this chat is to focus on Her Majesties. And we said, we pitched it to him as such because, there's lots of great interviews with John Glen out there. I mean, I could recommend really 007's recent interview with him at the beginning of last year. They spent about the same amount of time, but they really covered the scope of his work, whereas we really nailed down on Her Majesties. But so, yeah, I mean, Cam, what were some of your highlights from the chat?
I mean, just hearing him talk about the technical aspects of doing the bobsled chase was riveting to me because it's something you notice. We've talked to a few directors now, and they all have different approaches to talking about their craft. And while John Glen wasn't a primary director on Her Majesties, just the way he tackles his approach to filmmaking is very technical. And just his ability to break down the process of putting together what is, I think, one of the most phenomenal Bond action scenes of all time was just really interesting to me.
You're, of course, talking about the gondola in Venice, right?
Obviously, yes.
Yeah. No, it was interesting to hear the mechanics, how they go into this sort of thing, how these shots are put together. It's not something I thought I would get out of this interview, but really interesting insight. And I think this is the sort of information that people that are looking at filmmaking should really be learning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just his sort of explanation as to how to find sort of the rhythm of a moment. I liked when he was talking about that whole sequence that I love with the cackling bear photographer and that whole Christmas carnival and how he's sort of looking to strike a vibe with the music that's playing. I mean, it's one of those things, though, where when you listen sometimes to someone like a John Glen explain these moments, the magic is on the screen, but it's kind of like trying to explain the technical aspects. There's a divorce there that you can't quite ever connect because the person that made the movie is like, yes, here's how he did it. But ultimately, like, something between what they were doing on a technical, aspect versus the transition onto the big screen, it's like they created magic. And it's like, I don't even know if anyone really knows how they ever do it.
No, absolutely. And when we started the show, the whole idea was I was a complete novice when it comes to filmmaking and being a critic. I'm still a complete idiot, but that hasn't changed. And I'm slowly learning, how this stuff works. So for me, this is film school almost. And it's really interesting just to see that aspect of it. I know you know a wee bit more, but then there's this the disconnect sometimes. Like I watch a film and I know something works or it doesn't work. I can't tell you how. I can't tell you why sometimes. You're a bit better at that. You've got more words in your vocabulary than I do, so you sound smarter most of the time. But just to hear John break it down, it actually just makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and so often with these Bond films, there's like a real mystique about what goes on behind the scenes on Bond films. They all, kind of have this magic about them that I think us as Bond fans really appreciate. But I really do appreciate these inside looks where we get to hear people talk about the nuts and bolts about making a sequence, and just the fact that, like, when he's in the editing room putting together this movie, how they're just finding like solutions by accident, and somehow when you see the movie it's like incredible, but in the moment they're probably looking at the footage going like, ah, crap, how do we connect these two things? I don't know, any ideas? Let's try something.
Yeah, people don't even really think about editing as a. You see the name on the screen in the credits, but someone dumps off a whole reel of film and they tell you to make a movie out of it. That's quite the task. And I imagine what was actually filmed for a lot of those sequences, like the bobsleigh scene, for instance, was hours extra footage condensed into a 5 minute action sequence.
Yeah,
And that takes a hell of a lot of craft.
it does. And I'm always interested when I hear editors talk about filmmaking, because they would know, after all of their various work experiences, about battling with footage in the editing room. And oh man, I wish I had this shot because then I could make this happen. And so it's interesting to hear someone who would go on to become a director. And you get the sense, just hearing him talk about the bobsled, that there's a reason, whether you care for the movies he directed or didn't, they're very well made on a technical level. Like they really do hold together just on a coherent level in terms of visuals. And I would imagine it's from experiences like this, starting out as an editor and knowing exactly what you need to shoot to make a movie that's really going to play coherently to an audience.
And that's, I think, why you find a lot of people who started off as editors or writers, for instance, go on to make quite good directors because they know the building blocks of a story or the building blocks of a sequence. They had to do it themselves. So then they can translate that into what is the vision on the screen. I think of Shane Black, for instance, as a guy who did the same thing. But we did, of course, touch on John Glen's other Bond films. We saved like one or two questions each at the end because you can't let a chance to talk to someone about Christopher Walken in A View to a Kill just slip by.
My favorite anecdote, perhaps, of this entire interview is how they couldn't pin down Christopher Walken and he kept disappearing. That, to me, is an incredible little nugget of information there that seems so truthful.
I can just see him, like, I don't know, riding a horse somewhere. Because he is, of course, at home.
In the saddle.
Of course. Yeah, I that the idea of maybe he's like hiding in a bathroom because he doesn't want to do the scene or something. That's so Hollywood.
Just disappearing into the woods. That to me is incredible. Like, just the idea that someone had babysitting duty for Christopher Walken is so perfect a Hollywood story that it's incredible. And just hearing him talk about, these sort of grab bag of questions on, his other work, and the whole, nod to Teresa Bond at the start of For Your Eyes Only. And, things like that were really interesting to me because when you look at John Glen's work, he's, I think, really the only guy connected to these repeated mentions of Tracy. I think there might have been one actually in the Brosnan era, but you look at For Your Eyes Only, you've got the grave, and then in License to Kill, there is sort of an acknowledgement that Bond was married in the past and something bad happened. And I like that he was sort of working in these little continuity nods here and there at a time when you just did not do that. I mean, look at, Diamonds Are Forever, which followed this movie, for God's sakes, which he had nothing to do with.
Did that have any continuity in it?
Not really. You could, like, infer at the start of the movie that Bond is mad about the death of Teresa and hunting down Blofeld, but it could easily be him just chasing him after, You Only Live Twice. Like, there's no mention of a wife.
Yeah, it's a fair point. I hadn't really considered that, but I think we will be considering that very soon.
Yeah, not too far off, for sure.
But, just to bring it home, I'm so glad we got the chance to speak to John Glen. He has helped shape some of the most important pieces of cinema to both of our lives. I mean, we have a spy movie podcast. We're not talking about James Bond every week, but we started this over our love of James Bond. And the man is responsible for a handful of them. And I think, has he got the most directing credits of any
Yeah,
on all of
he
Bond?
does. Yeah, and he's one of the few voices we have for that classic Bond era in terms of behind the scenes personnel. But he wouldn't become a director till later on, but just doing second unit and editing on Honor Majesties. There's not a lot of people who worked on those '60s Bond films that we're even able to talk about. So to have his insights is invaluable.
Absolutely. But I mean, what a way to almost finish 2021.
That's right. That's right. Because we have another interview landing next week with Yvonne Zima, who played Gina Davis's daughter in The Long Kiss Goodnight, a film that has really grown into a cult favorite and one I think a lot of action fans are watching this time of year.
Absolutely. I mean, we've only identified two spy Christmas films, one being On Her Majesty's and the second being The Long Kiss Goodnight, although we are putting it together a couple of follow-up ones that will take us through the next few Christmases, so don't worry about that. But just a chance to speak to... We haven't spoken to an actor in a long time, actually.
Quite a while, yeah.
Again, Yvonne was very generous with her time. So once you're finished with Christmas dinner, you're full of chocolates, just sit back next Tuesday and listen to the interview, and then we'll be joining you back with a normal episode in 2022.
That's right.
So your mission, of course, should you choose to accept it, is to join us next week and listen to the Yvonne Zimmer interview, and also check out Long Kiss Goodnight if you haven't seen it. It's a film we both enjoyed watching. It didn't quite make the knock list for us, but it was a close one for sure.
And I enjoyed the hell out of the rewatch for the interview, so it is a movie that's a lot of fun.
Absolutely. And again, thank you to John Glen. And do not forget to follow us discreetly on social media at SpyHards. That's SpyHards on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. But until next week, listeners, he had a lot of guts.